Timothy, I think we can start, so thank you for coming and joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Okay, well, we'll go and get started then. Really excited about this session, especially after all of the great presentations earlier today. And this theme is about the DARPA Subterranean Challenge. And quite frankly, I think this is where we'll see an opportunity for the legged robotics to have shined in these really complex environments. So my name is Tim Chung. I was the DARPA program manager for the DARPA Subterranean Challenge. And I'm pleased to join you here today and share a little bit about the Subterranean Challenge, and we'll hear from the winners in subsequent talks. So the vision for the DARPA Sub-T Challenge was to truly inspire and discover the variety of robotic technologies, focus on achieving this thing called actionable situational awareness, and to do so across a lot of different types of underground contexts. And so we really deeply were interested in not just having robots that can operate in one type of an environment, but in fact, across these three diverse types of environments: human-made tunnel systems like mines, urban underground like transit and infrastructure, and naturally occurring cave networks that really has the randomness that nature likes to throw at things. And so how can our robotic systems be able to conquer and work in these types of environments? And so the Sub-T Challenge was around this notion that you can't just have these point solutions, but in fact, you need to think about how to accomplish the mission across these very distinguishing environments. So everything from confined spaces to verticality to the challenges of communication and perception. And you see there's some commonality and overlap, but then there are other places where different environments are outliers. So how can we design these types of resilient systems that will handle these environments? And frankly, the legged robots are just one tool in the tool chest to be able to handle this. And so we're interested in these systems of systems to be able to address these types of environments. For many of you in the audience who have either lived or walked through or operated in these types of environments, you know that the environment is what makes Sub-T environments hard. The variable lighting, the difficulty with things like dust, whether you kick it up yourself or that's naturally present. Moisture finds its way into these types of environments, but also the terrain. And the terrain, not only in terms of human-made type things like stairs, but uneven terrain, dynamic obstacles that are happening, and of course verticality that happens. And so all of these coming together, these are screenshots of environments that robots had to face throughout the DARPA Sub-T Challenge. And so all of those, this is what DARPA likes to do, is take those challenging contexts and turn those into areas where technology needs to be accelerated, and design this challenge around ways to incentivize those innovations. In particular, those innovations arose in autonomy, perception, networking, and mobility. And while mobility may be the focus to some degree in this workshop, it really was the coming together across all four of these technology areas that were needed to be successful in the Sub-T Challenge. So what was the Sub-T Challenge? Well, it really was about going and conducting this underground scavenger hunt. DARPA placed a myriad of objects, those that are listed here, we call them artifacts. We placed them in underground environments, tunnels, urban, and cave environments, and robots were deployed. No humans were allowed, and never got to see what was in these courses, these environments a priori. These robots are now going into these unknown underground settings and have to find and localize these objects to within a specific level of precision. And these weren't just visually identifiable objects. These were things like CO2, carbon dioxide gas, or thermally represented thermal signatures that you had to localize. Or maybe it was a Wi-Fi hotspot signature that you had to then go find. And so all of these needed to come together through multimodal perception. But of course, as we all know, you have to be able to get there first to be able to do those types of detections and localizations. To provide a little bit more overview, we embarked on this journey in the Sub-T Challenge, focusing individually on the tunnel, urban, and cave-like events in environments, and came together this past fall in a one-of-a-kind environment that merged facets of all three of these underground settings into a single course for the final event. So I'm happy to share that with you here. The video that kind of highlights the coal mine, the nuclear power plant, and ultimately the final event course that we're able to.
Hello everyone, and welcome to DARPA's Subterranean Challenge, the final event.
To me, these are the Super Bowl of the engineering and scientist community.
It's been a lot of work, is really what it comes down to.
It's been a long and hard journey for the last 3 years.
Doing what we do and actually going out, seeing where the theory meets the, the pavement, it's world-class education.
There is a lot of knowledge in this cave.
So hopefully that just gave you a snapshot, and you'll hear more from some of our teams. I just wanted to share here the design of the course, where we took over the segment of an underground cavern and built physically a one-of-a-kind environment. And so what you're seeing here are the three different subdomains, cave, tunnel, and urban, represented. We built this intentionally to really stress test robots that need to go and maneuver through all three of these environments in order to be successful for the Sub-T Challenge. And so in the interest of sharing some of the insights with this audience, I want to highlight the three that I'll mention. There were many, many more, and we'll hear some of them here shortly. I think one of the takeaways, of course, is that attrition of robots is not only possible, but very much likely in the real world. One of the key takeaways for us was that most of the teams had robots that didn't survive even the first 10 minutes of an hour-long run, and not all robots that went in all came out of the courses on their own volition. There were a variety of reasons for that, the environment and the terrain being one of them. There was also, commonly placed objects in the environment that one could never have really imagined would thwart our robots, whether they be air, ground, wheeled, legged, etc. I think that's one of the takeaways. And so understanding what it means to be resilient, whether that means recovery mechanisms or redundancy in terms of number of robots, etc., I think are all part of the issue. And so reliability, streamlining the integration process, having things that are adaptive and offering recovery behaviors built into your robotic systems, like being able to right yourself if you've fallen down. And in the interest of time, I won't go through all of these types of attrition mitigation strategies that many of these teams employed, but listing here, there are just a number of different ways that one team had to think about how to recover from failure or mission impairment of any of their robots. The second insight that I think many of us faced was that being able to create a map, which is our bread and butter in the robotics community, does not necessarily imply that you've done a good job of gathering and accruing situational awareness. Meaning, even if you were to generate a full map of the environment, doesn't necessarily mean you've accomplished the mission. And the reason why that's relevant is mobility is just part of the solution here. You need to get everywhere, of course, to get that map. There just needs to be a lot more than just getting there to be able to accomplish the mission. What I'm showing you here are the types of maps that the teams were able to generate, and you can see high degree of fidelity in these maps. But in the context of the artifact scavenger hunt, just because you passed by it doesn't necessarily mean you were able to score it. And so I think that's another takeaway here. As we think about mobility as an enabler, it is not the end all and be all, I think, is the takeaway. And so here, one way to help maneuver in that space would be to enhance the ability to have context in our perception, to understand the human teammate construct of, in many cases, requiring human inputs is a limiter. And then, much as I alluded to, where you needed multimodal sensing to truly be able to handle and detect all of the diverse types of artifacts, enabling better cross-queuing across detections could potentially help as well. And so SLAM being foundational, as we all know, but there's a lot more to it in order to be able to claim mission success. And so thirdly, and finally, the commoditization of robotics. I note that this is the 6th workshop for legged robots. And if you were to take a look at where we started back in 2019 in the coal mines of Pittsburgh, we did have teams bring their legged robots out to that tunnel circuit competition. And while it was a small fraction of the teams being able to do that, we also saw severe limitations operating in these environments where there was mud and holes and rails and other things that would really literally trip up the legged robots. But I think what you see in the final event on the right-hand side is the significant growth and maturation of legged robotic technologies, that it got to a point where it was no longer a liability, that's for sure. It was no longer even a competitive advantage in the sense that only 1 or 2 teams were able to make use of legged robots. But in fact, it became more of a commodity where 75% of our teams are fielding more handfuls of legged robots and able to use them in good effect, and to be able to turn around technologies with integration in just a couple of months. And so the takeaway message here is that as legged robots, thanks in part to this audience, I'd say has really become an enabler for all of the other things that we're interested in. We saw that transformation happen over the lifespan of the DARPA Sub-T Challenge with these types of commercially available, commercial off-the-shelf platforms, enabling integration in even under less than a couple of months, and finding ways to take a lot of the research, cutting-edge research, but then apply them in these types of field settings. And so I think that's a phenomenal testament to the commitment of this community specifically focused on legged robots. And so I'm going to close by just highlighting that, of course, even with the conclusion of the DARPA Subterranean Challenge, we still have many more lessons to go. The real world certainly poses many additional obstacles that we have yet to face. Mobility being one of them. I'd say it's still not a conquered, solved problem, of course, thankfully, for all of us here. But in addition to that, I would encourage all of us to think about going beyond, of course, the mobility and understanding what it means to address the missions and the environments kind of holistically. So yes, legged robots are complex systems. There's a lot of additional work that I know we want to do there, but what can we do when we think about it in the context of how do we compose our fleets of robots? How do we deal with attrition and isolation of these robots, especially in the context of multi-robot teams? What information, if you had it going into these environments, could dramatically improve your performance with a little bit of a priori gain tuning or what have you? And then also this idea of when do you give up and when do you try harder? I think that's a really interesting one for having a little bit of self-introspection for our robots, and mobility definitely a part of that conversation. And so with that, I'm pleased to say that in my estimation, the DARPA Subterranean Challenge was an amazing opportunity to see the rapid progress of technology that's necessary for real world robots, in large part to the types of technologies that have come to fruition thanks to folks in the audience here. And so the Sub-T Challenge community definitely thanks you. The Sub-T Challenge community, I think, absolutely benefited and led the way in a number of areas. And to that end, I'm eager to turn it over to the rest of the session members here to hear about their winning strategies and solutions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your insight. Are there any questions from the audience? Someone wants to ask a question? We have one question. Hi. Thanks for the presentation. It was really interesting. Do you remember my question? Mine's 5.1.
can jump in quickly. Tim, Marco here from Cerberus. If you go back now to 2018, when before you announced this and before you saw all our proposals, what did you expect? What kind of solution will come? And did we meet that in terms of the teams that they provided in the end?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Oh man, hindsight is 20/20 always. What I'll say is I was deeply excited about the role of, for example, legged robotic platforms. I think they were definitely going to play a role, but as you know, at that time there was still a lot of growing to be done there. So I'd say there was high hopes for multipedal locomotion, and so I'm glad to see that have paid off in terms of the bet there. In terms of other types of strategies, I think there was marsupialness, I think, was definitely pretty high in the minds, and I think there were opportunities where we saw that showcased in Sub-T Challenge as well. And so in some ways it was really great to see solution sets arising that were already pre-imagined, but that they were organically identified by teams that ended up competing. So I'd say the robots that can carry other robots, what we didn't see were aerial robots carrying other aerial robots, although that could have played a role here. Another area of locomotion that I find interesting and was on the table were things like modular robots that would attach and detach as necessary to overcome some of the locomotion and mobility challenges. So there was a little bit of that in terms of robots that would take off of other robots, but not so much transformers that would let you cross chasms, even if they were individually too wide to stretch. And so those are a variety. I mean, that's, I think the nature of mobility solutions is that there's such a wide range that we didn't know what to expect. I am excited to say that one of the big bets here was that many years of dollars of investments in legged robotic systems were going to be the case. I think kind of a related question of, do we believe humanoids are really needed versus quadrupeds? I think the answer, and we've seen this, is absolutely not necessary that humanoids are the answer. In fact, in my many cave spelunking adventures to go find the right venues, there were plenty of times where I have 5 points of contact, in fact, right? Feet, hands, and my rear, just trying to be able to maneuver in these spaces. And so even in those settings, really wasn't taking a humanoid form to be able to locomote in those environments. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.
But I remember my question. So to try to give us all here an understanding of the current limitations of the most advanced cave spelunking robots, what areas and types of environments could no robot successfully navigate, or what items could none of them find, or what areas could nearly none of them find?
Yeah, fantastic question. Well, I mean, for one, climbing robot, so to speak, right? Rock climbing robots. I think earlier presentation had an ibex from the BBC special climbing the dam or whatnot. So we're pretty far from being able to do that. So that's certainly sheer space, verticals are a really tough place to locomote, certainly with ground platforms. I think that's, again, a reason why aerial platforms have such a strong role to play in that kind of a setting. Really kind of the granular environments, so malleable surfaces, water, moist, slick. I mean, there are solutions still to be had, but being able to traverse the wide range there, I think, is a pretty big span. And since the real world doesn't let us go and measure the friction coefficient a priori, I think that's one of the major issues as well. So I'd say things like sand and gravel and such, I know we can maneuver through them. It's really a question of, are there ways to optimize the design of systems to be able to conquer those environments? Thanks for the question.
We've got one more question in the chat, so if you could have a look at the question.
Yeah, so I think the question that you're referring to is how big was the issue of sustained power in the competitions, and is this a significant limitation? Well, so we can certainly point to missions of much longer duration where significant power budgets are consumed, and that would be a limiter, absolutely. In the 1 hour mission sets, we found that the legged platforms, that they were up to the task. Our aerial platforms, for example, were far more limited in those settings. There were other cases, however, things like overheating, both due to obviously the heavy level of compute that's carried, but also to the actuators that are on board. Those are major issues as well, clearly a power draw. I do think that there are efficiencies that we don't always get a chance to take advantage of when we go to legged versus, for example, wheeled. But again, that's the trade space of thinking about things holistically. You get higher height of eye, you get a little bit better articulation, you might get an improvement in speed and traversability. So I think sometimes that's the case, but by and large, again, like I said, by the end of the sub-T challenge, we found many of those packaging problems, including power and endurance, to be addressed at least in the kind of the tactical or short-term mission sets that we were interested in of 1 hour to 1.5 hour duration.
One last question from the audience.
Thanks for the talk. I have a question about sort of a hindsight for the challenge. Have you seen any global trends for a sensor suite for all the robots? Are you seeing that there are situations where maybe all the robots cannot perceive what's going on very effectively?
Yeah, just to make sure I understand, was that specifically about the perception payloads?
Any kind of sensors, so LiDAR, perception.
Yeah. Global trends. Well, I mean, I think, so one of the fascinating things about robotics, as you know, is it's not just exteroceptive sensing or just proprioceptive sensing, but it's the fusion of both. And so I do think that there is trends of being able to kind of think about sensors and data and AI approaches to those data in a more holistic, integrated way that binds exteroceptive and proprioceptive in a really elegant way now. Tools that enable that to happen either more quickly or at greater volume, I think have definitely demonstrated both commercial and market viability, but also significant applicability in things like sub-T environments. And so without pointing to any specific trend per se, but I would say that that merging of extereo and proprioceptive sensing in tightly coupled ways, nominally inclusive of how you wrap that around the control loop for locomotion. I think there's still room to grow there, but a lot of advances that have been really remarkable to witness.
I would like to thank our speaker again. So the next talk comes from Cerberus team, the winning team, and here's some